Kennedy presented her with an inquiry so basic that any 10-year-old student residing in Louisiana could resolve it using just a handful of words, yet Ilhan Omar completely failed to resolve it despite having 40 minutes. And once she finally surrendered her attempts, every single camera lens situated within Heart 902 had successfully documented the exact outcome she desperately hoped to hide. The cameras captured not the vocalization, but rather the heavy silence that followed when she exhausted all possible replies. To fully grasp how an individual who previously screamed accusations of murder at the highest executive in the nation sat frozen inside a congressional chamber, completely unable to utter a single syllable, you must first examine her opening remarks upon entering and the immediate follow-up posed by the seasoned politician. Omar never waited for a formal invitation to begin speaking, as waiting simply was not her style. She had spent the previous 3 months entirely ignoring every single summons from her home state's legislature demanding her testimony regarding the most massive public health fraud in national history. Following 90 days of absolute silence, she finally strolled into Heart 902 on a Tuesday afternoon during June, took her seat at the witness desk, pulled the microphone a couple inches closer to her mouth, and flipped open a massive dark binder. The binder contained colorful tabs labeled with handwritten notes her aides spent 2 full days organizing, and she commenced reciting her statement before the presiding chairman had even completed his introductory remarks. The binder was incredibly dense, packed with rebuttals for every conceivable inquiry her staff could predict. It contained prepared arguments neatly categorized by subject matter, covering immigration issues, corruption charges, monetary declarations, and personal smears, with each specific section featuring a distinct tab and a pre-written defense tucked right behind it. That massive binder functioned as a defensive stronghold, representing the exact caliber of intense preparation capable of conquering a tribunal whenever the interrogations prove highly complex. Unfortunately, absolutely nobody on her team prepared for interrogations that were remarkably basic. She declared her intent to be perfectly transparent regarding her presence that day, utilizing a vocal tone that immediately reached rally-level intensity. It was the exact piercing volume she deployed whenever she demanded the absolute furthest corners of an auditorium hear her voice, mirroring the sheer decibel level that echoed throughout the House floor 4 months prior when she publicly shouted down the commander-in-chief during his national address. She insisted her attendance was purely the result of the panel engaging in a synchronized partisan assault targeting a minority female refugee who possessed the courage to challenge institutional authority. She argued that over the past 6 years, every single probe, committee session, and media headline was explicitly engineered to muzzle minority voices like hers that caused discomfort among elite power brokers. Locking eyes directly with Kennedy, she boldly proclaimed that she remained completely unbothered by the scrutiny, boasting that she had weathered significantly worse trials than his tribunal. Positioned centrally upon the elevated platform with his title plaque resting before him, Kennedy kept a solitary plain folder to his left side and a beverage to his right. He kept his reading spectacles shoved halfway down the bridge of his nose, and his writing instrument remained untouched, resting atop the folder. He completely refrained from documenting anything during her passionate monologue, opting instead to observe her with the exact patient demeanor of a seasoned local watching a severe storm roll across the horizon, fully aware that Mother Nature adheres to her own timeline. Once Omar concluded her opening, Kennedy gently leaned forward, pulled the spectacles off his face, and grasped them loosely in one hand. Addressing the representative, his vocal tone emerged incredibly relaxed, heavily coated with thick Akkadian warmth. He expressed genuine gratitude for her attendance, acknowledging that she had routinely rejected previous invitations and admitting that occupying the hot seat is something nobody genuinely anticipates with joy. He sincerely praised her courage for finally appearing before the panel. Replacing his spectacles onto his face, he stated his desire to establish a foundational understanding regarding her personal background before plunging into the complicated specifics of legislation, bureaucratic programs, or financial statistics. He emphasized that her unique personal journey holds immense significance because it serves as the primary reason her constituents elected her to public office. Omar studied him intensely, mirroring the cautious way someone eyes a neighborhood dog that has never attacked but clearly possesses sharp fangs. He politely inquired if it was accurate that she immigrated to the Republic as a refugee, which she quickly confirmed. He then asked for her exact age upon arrival, to which she replied she was 12 years old when departing Somalia. He further verified if she and her loved ones spent 4 prior years residing inside a Kenyan refugee settlement known as Dadaab, which she also confirmed. He summarized her timeline, highlighting her 4 years in the camp and arriving stateside at 12 years old. He then asked if the nation properly supported her upon arrival, inquiring if the Republic supplied her loved ones with shelter, nourishment, and academic opportunities. Omar physically shifted in her seat, sensing the underlying current of the interrogation the way one feels an aquatic undertow long before witnessing the surface water break. She conceded that the nation did indeed grant her family a significant opportunity. Nodding at a glacial pace, the senator mentally cataloged her response for future deployment. He declared that a young refugee girl successfully unlocking the gateway to the Republic stands as arguably the most stunning phrase imaginable within the English language, insisting his sentiment was totally genuine. Flipping open his plain folder, he revealed a single sheet of paper tucked inside. He transitioned the dialogue toward a different demographic of 12-year-olds, specifically those residing within her own territory in Minneapolis, representing the 5th district of her state. He detailed how during the massive public health crisis when educational facilities locked their doors and students lost access to cafeteria meals, a specific federal initiative was designed to ensure they remained fed. Acknowledging her familiarity with the Federal Nutrition Initiative, he noted she personally drafted the exact legislation that altered the operational framework of that program. He asked her to confirm she authored the specific measure bearing her name. She affirmed introducing the mandate to guarantee vulnerable youth continually receive necessary meals amid a historic catastrophe. He asked if it was an accurate assessment to state her legislation stripped away specific qualifying hurdles for distribution hubs, thereby streamlining the process for unaffiliated groups to enroll and secure government payouts. She defended the action by claiming it broadened availability during a massive crisis when schools shuttered and youth desperately required sustenance. Kennedy patiently acknowledged the crisis, clarifying that absolutely nobody present was suggesting youth ought to starve. He emphasized he was merely questioning the removal of the structural safeguards. He noted that prior to her mandate, the initiative demanded strict prerequisites, facility reviews, and extensive paperwork before asking her for a simple confirmation or denial regarding whether her bill weakened those protections. Citing the necessity for rapid deployment during a generational crisis, she admitted certain hurdles were indeed modified. Kennedy scribbled a solitary word onto the margin of his document. He maintained a long-standing practice of noting a single out-of-place word from a witness's reply, a technique he honed over 2 decades serving as a regional financial executive when he routinely interviewed department chiefs and isolated their most problematic vocabulary. He pointed out that following her bill's inclusion into the broader relief package, the volume of local distribution hubs demanding payouts skyrocketed from roughly 30 to surpassing 250 within an 18-month window. He further noted that several of those hubs registered and demanded cash for thousands of supposed meals a mere matter of days after incorporating. He asked if she was fully aware of that staggering timeline. She deflected by claiming the initiative successfully broadened its reach exactly as intended during a catastrophe that shattered every domestic system. The senator drew a thick line beneath the specific word he had just jotted down. He pivoted to focus on one specific hub among the expanded roster, naming a venue known as Safari Restaurant situated in Minneapolis, asking if she recognized the establishment. Omar's physical stance shifted a fraction, which proved entirely sufficient to convey her discomfort. She vaguely claimed familiarity with numerous neighborhood groups operating within her territory. He expressed absolute confidence in her familiarity, reminding her she previously appeared on a localized Somali broadcast, stared directly into the lens, and explicitly praised Safari Restaurant by name. He recalled her boasting that the venue supposedly provided over 2,000 meals daily to struggling households, asking if she recalled making that specific claim. She defensively stated she championed groups actively feeding citizens during a massive crisis. He reiterated the staggering figure of 2,000 daily meals, emphasizing that was the exact metric she fed to her supporters. He then revealed the proprietor of that specific venue was recently convicted of massive federal corruption, illicit money washing, and illegal payoffs. He noted the venue siphoned over $16 million from the exact initiative her mandate broadened, and federal investigators concluded the vast majority of those claimed meals were completely fabricated. Closing his folder, Kennedy presented a remarkably basic inquiry. He asked the representative if she genuinely believed the claim that Safari was actively feeding over 2,000 youth daily when she publicly endorsed them on television. Omar lunged toward her microphone, and her vocal delivery instantly transformed, elevating in pitch, accelerating in tempo, and reverting back to the aggressive rally cadence she utilized when branding the president a killer. It was a drastically different persona than the one who had calmly discussed her time in Dadaab merely 60 seconds prior. She aggressively proclaimed she believed her neighborhood was facing an assault, that local youth were starving, that federal agencies were abandoning them, and that elected officials like herself held a duty to intervene. She firmly declared her refusal to sit there and face aggressive interrogation as if championing her constituents constituted a felony offense. Kennedy allowed her final defiant word to float in the air for a couple seconds before leaning backward, intertwining his fingers, and speaking with the disappointed tone of someone hearing exactly what they expected but desperately wished to avoid. He gently reminded the representative that he posed a binary question, asking if she sincerely believed the staggering daily meal count when she broadcasted it, demanding a simple confirmation or denial. She stubbornly insisted she had already provided her answer. He calmly corrected her, stating she delivered a political monologue, which is vastly different from an actual answer. At that moment, Kennedy executed a maneuver the cameras documented, but the live audience failed to fully comprehend until the footage was later isolated, slowed down, and analyzed. He pulled his spectacles off, rested them onto the surface, and spoke without their visual aid. His vocal cadence shifted entirely as the folksy Louisiana warmth evaporated completely. His tone dropped lower and flatter, revealing the highly educated cadence of a man who studied jurisprudence at Oxford and lectured at academic institutions, entirely shedding the rural attorney persona he often projected. He sternly warned the Congresswoman against sitting in that chair and claiming that investigating the disappearance of $250 million constitutes an attack upon her specific ethnic community. He hammered home the reality that the starved youth were Somali, the stolen funds belonged to Somali youth, the dozens of convicted fraudsters hailed from the Somali community, and the politician who eliminated the legal safeguard shares that exact same heritage. He bluntly stated that absolutely nobody in the chamber introduced racial politics into the dialogue except her, accusing her of deploying that tactic strictly because she lacked a legitimate defense. He paused briefly, and the rural accent returned as he placed his spectacles back on, slipping the mask of the folksy Southern grandfather back over his face like a screen door clicking shut. However, everyone present had caught a glimpse of the fierce intellect operating behind the facade. The citizens watching from their homes, who had endured years of being branded bigots simply for questioning Ilhan Omar, felt a profound release of tension in their chests because a politician finally articulated exactly what they had desperately wanted to say for over half a decade, and he accomplished it without ever raising his volume. If you have ever been smeared as a racist simply for demanding accountability regarding your tax contributions, you need to smash that subscribe button immediately because the senator just cracked open a folder containing a single sheet of paper while the representative has completely abandoned her massive binder of talking points. Stick around because his upcoming inquiry targets her personal finances. Kennedy poured himself some water from the pitcher on the elevated desk, took a modest sip, placed the glass down, and transitioned to his next line of questioning with the methodical pace of a rancher inspecting the next post along a property fence line. Showing zero rush or theatrics, he announced his intent to review her personal financial disclosures. He noted that in the year 2024, she formally documented her spouse possessing commercial holdings valued anywhere from $6 to $30 million, asking if that figure was accurate. She claimed her initial submission featured an inaccuracy that was later rectified. He casually accepted the claim of an error and inquired about the revised figure. She stated the corrected document showed their combined household wealth sitting between $18,000 and $95,000. Kennedy slowly removed his spectacles, polishing them with the edge of his blazer while holding them against the overhead lighting to inspect for smudges before placing them back on. He asked her to clarify, using plain language suitable for a simple rural lawyer, how her spouse was suddenly worth tens of millions in one document and barely $18,000 in the next, asking bluntly if her husband was a millionaire or not. She blamed the initial document on incomplete data provided by her spouse's financial team, claiming they recorded raw assets without factoring in the associated debts. He reminded the representative that he served as his state's chief financial officer for 2 decades, noting he had reviewed countless ledgers and witnessed numerous accounting blunders. He acknowledged seeing people accidentally add extra zeros or misplaced decimal points. However, he firmly stated that throughout his 20 years monitoring finances, he had never once encountered an accidental discrepancy of $30 million, because a gap of that magnitude does not represent a simple clerical mistake, but rather an entirely different socioeconomic existence. He flipped his single piece of paper over, revealing nothing on the back before flipping it right side up again. He explained that working-class citizens in his home state, and likely in her district as well, sit at their kitchen tables every spring surrounded by risottos and cold coffee, sweating over their calculators. He noted that if a regular citizen miscalculates by a mere $1,000, they receive an intimidating official notice demanding the balance plus penalties. If they miscalculate by $10,000, federal agents physically arrive at their doorstep instead of sending a letter. Shaking his head while staring at the desk rather than at her, he admitted he had absolutely no idea what penalties apply to a $30 million discrepancy because he had never met a single soul capable of making a mistake of that astronomical size. He stressed that regular citizens lack the financial luxury to be wrong by tens of millions of dollars, possessing only the absolute necessity to be perfectly accurate because accuracy is the only thing they can afford. He allowed that profound truth to linger, aiming the message directly at the working-class families watching rather than the media cameras. Pivoting back to the numbers, he noted her political campaign funneled roughly $3 million into her husband's consulting agency over several years. He emphasized this was publicly available electoral data, noting the funds originated from grassroots supporters donating small increments because they genuinely believed in her political vision. She defended the massive payouts by claiming they covered legitimate campaign services, including digital marketing and donor outreach, proudly noting federal regulators cleared the transactions of any illicit activity. He quickly clarified he never accused her of breaking the law, but rather emphasized it was the donor's hard-earned capital. He stressed that $3 million of supporter cash was funneled directly to a man she publicly swore on camera she was not romantically involved with, only to marry him shortly thereafter. He bluntly asked if her grassroots donors were fully aware of the true nature of their relationship when they signed those checks. Omar lunged forward once more, deploying her aggressive rally voice for the 3rd consecutive time. She complained these exact types of insinuations represent the precise politically driven character attacks that minority women endure daily while serving in public office. Kennedy observed her physical lunge and noted the vocal shift, mentally logging the predictable reaction much like an angler noting a bobber dipping in the exact same location for a 3rd time. He offered no immediate pushback, choosing to hold his tongue for the moment. He then mentioned her spouse also held partial ownership in a California-based vineyard, pointing out that she operates as a devout Muslim who married him through a traditional Islamic rite, a fact her own staff previously verified. He paused briefly, ensuring he selected his words with absolute precision rather than seeking a dramatic effect. He admitted he was not a theological expert and refused to pretend he grasped every nuance of any given religion. However, he noted his awareness regarding the strict Islamic stance on consuming spirits, emphasizing that her entire public persona is heavily anchored to her religious devotion. He clarified his inquiry was not a cheap trick, but a sincere question regarding which aspects of her existence adhere to her strict religious tenets and which aspects conveniently adapt to her current situation. Omar offered absolutely no reply, her hand simply drifting toward her binder, grazing a colored tab without actually opening it, before retreating back to the desk. If you have ever watched a public figure demand strict integrity while their own ledger is completely disastrous, drop the word accountability in the comment section immediately. Do not click away because the senator is preparing to interrogate her regarding the events of September 11th, and the representative is about to deliver two wildly contradictory responses to the exact same question inside the exact same chamber. Kennedy removed his spectacles yet again, placing them on the desk using both hands to align them perfectly parallel with the edge, mimicking the precise movements of a craftsman organizing his instruments prior to executing delicate labor. He flatly asked the Congresswoman what occurred on the 11th of September in the year 2001. Omar delivered a flat, highly sanitized response stating extremists assaulted the Republic. He asked for the exact casualty count, to which she replied almost 3,000 citizens perished. He nodded slightly, noting she deliberately utilized the term citizens. He recalled that several years prior, during an event in California, she summarized that horrific day by stating that some individuals committed an act while discussing the most devastating assault on domestic soil since Pearl Harbor. Staring directly at her, he demanded to know which version represented her true feelings. He asked if her genuine stance was the sanitized version she just delivered while under oath, before rolling cameras for the official historical transcript, or the dismissive phrase she delivered to a room packed with loyalists when she assumed only her political base was paying attention. Omar lunged forward again, deploying the aggressive rally voice for a third time, complaining that her quote had been maliciously weaponized out of context for years. She claimed her original speech focused entirely on the loss of civil liberties suffered by minority groups following the attacks and the necessity of organizations defending those constitutional freedoms. Kennedy shot back that he had reviewed the entire transcript line by line. He pointed out she completely failed to mention extremists attacking the nation or the thousands of citizens slaughtered. He emphasized she literally said some individuals committed an act. He broke down the phrase, noting it consists of a handful of basic words that require absolutely zero additional context because they carry a devastatingly clear meaning entirely on their own. Kennedy paused significantly longer than he had all afternoon, letting 5 heavy seconds of absolute silence echo through the microphones. When he finally spoke again, the rural accent had vanished for a second time, replaced by the freezing Oxford cadence, delivering a chillingly calm tone resembling solid ice. He reminded her that nearly 3,000 individuals perished, noting every single victim possessed a name and loved ones who are still waiting for them to return. He stressed that those grieving families are forced to watch her dismissive video clip every single year when the anniversary arrives. He firmly declared that her dismissive phrasing does not suffer from a lack of context, but rather exists as a horrific insult, and accused her of fully understanding that reality when she initially spoke the words. The rural accent instantly returned alongside his spectacles, bringing the folksy grandfather persona back to the forefront. However, the entire chamber had now witnessed the formidable intellect lurking behind the mask twice, finally understanding the rural persona was not a costume, but rather a leash preventing a vicious hound from attacking. Kennedy poured another glass of water, took a single sip, and placed it down, allowing the glass to clink against the wood, signaling he was in absolutely no rush to conclude. He transitioned to a more recent event, specifically the presidential address delivered to a combined legislative session earlier that February. He recalled how she stood up inside that historic chamber before the entire Republic and the watching globe and screamed that the commander-in-chief was a killer and a fraud. He asked if she remembered the incident, which she quickly confirmed, boldly adding she would gladly repeat the action. He noted she told a major news network the following day that her outburst was necessary because individuals from her neighborhood had perished under his administration, claiming she was simply reminding him of that fact. Kennedy stated he had served in the Capitol for a massive portion of his life, admitting he had vehemently disagreed with executives and harbored intense anger toward them. He confessed to returning home at night and muttering things about sitting executives that he would never dare repeat in front of his own mother. However, he firmly declared he had never once stood inside the halls of the national legislature and screamed like a maniac during a formal address. He explained he possessed the basic decency to recognize the vast difference between a prestigious legislative chamber and a filthy tavern brawl, asking if she possessed that same basic understanding. Omar clenched her jaw and sarcastically replied with supposed respect that the difference was his specific community was not actively facing an assault. Kennedy fired back with equal sarcastic respect, clarifying the issue had absolutely nothing to do with her specific neighborhood, but rather the prestigious institution she swore a sacred vow to honor. He argued she possesses every right to debate the executive, block his agenda, or even pursue removal from office, but she absolutely lacks the right to transform a sacred legislative chamber into a cheap political rally and disguise it as legitimate representation. He powerfully concluded that true representation requires providing actual answers, whereas screaming simply proves you have entirely exhausted your intellectual defenses. Kennedy adjusted his single sheet of paper, having required absolutely zero additional documents throughout the entire afternoon. He noted he had been feeding her remarkably simple inquiries for quite some time, the exact type of questions that demand merely a single sentence if the witness actually possesses a legitimate defense. He mentioned observing a specific behavioral pattern, looking directly into her eyes rather than playing to the cameras. He pointed out that whenever he posed a question she could comfortably handle, she spoke to him normally, mimicking two average citizens sharing a casual chat, keeping her vocal pitch level and her hands perfectly still before moving forward. Tapping the desk a single time with his pointer finger, he noted a drastic shift occurs whenever he asks a question she cannot successfully evade. He described how she immediately lunges into the microphone, elevates her pitch, accelerates her speech, completely abandons the conversation, and launches into a fiery political monologue. He highlighted it was the exact same aggressive tone she deployed when screaming at the executive, when defending the corrupt restaurant, when explaining her disastrous financial ledgers, and when addressing her horrific comments regarding the September attacks. Raising his hand to physically tally the examples on his fingers, much like a patron checking a grocery receipt, he listed the discrepancies. He asked about starving youth, and she delivered a monologue on bigotry. He asked about $250 million missing dollars, and she delivered a monologue on the viral outbreak. He asked about a massive financial discrepancy, and she delivered a monologue on accounting errors. He asked about the worst terrorist attack in history, and she delivered two vastly different replies based entirely on her audience. Lowering his hand, he shared a profound lesson he learned over 2 decades serving in the Capitol. He bluntly stated that individuals who possess legitimate answers readily provide them, whereas individuals lacking answers exclusively deliver fiery monologues. If you have ever watched a political figure twist a remarkably basic inquiry into a massive, evasive rant covering everything except the actual truth, you understand exactly what the seasoned lawmaker just exposed. Share this broadcast with a single individual who desperately needs to witness it, and return immediately because the concluding moments guarantee this footage will remain legendary for decades. Omar finally spoke, and for the absolute first time all afternoon, both the aggressive rally persona and the highly sanitized political voice completely vanished. What finally emerged sounded like raw exhaustion, carried over a massive distance by someone deeply fatigued by the journey. She challenged him to reduce her entirely to her darkest moments, bitterly accepting that destroying people like her is the primary function of that specific chamber. Her volume dropped significantly as she recounted arriving in the Republic totally unable to speak the native tongue at 12 years old. She described witnessing the horrors of a brutal civil conflict, surviving inside a filthy canvas tent for 4 years, enduring relentless academic bullying, being branded as unintelligent, and facing constant demands to flee the country from educators, peers, and random citizens who judged her entirely on superficial traits. She proudly declared she was still standing resiliently inside chambers designed to break her, claiming she had been fiercely battling since long before anyone in the Capitol ever recognized her face. It was undeniably authentic, and the entire room felt the raw reality of her pain. A court typist completely ceased recording, resting her hands atop her machine, while a journalist seated in the second row stared down at her own palms. Kennedy remained totally frozen, his hands clasped firmly atop his desk, his expression displaying the unique, quiet respect of a man who instantly recognizes genuine truth when it slides across the table. In that specific fleeting second, she was undeniably human, and the chamber owed her the respect of acknowledging that humanity, which Kennedy honored by refusing to interrupt her. He waited 3 complete seconds after she concluded before speaking with the softest tone he had utilized during the entire session. He sincerely assured the representative that he fully believed her struggles. He validated the incredible journey of a non-English-speaking 12-year-old girl escaping a dirt-floored tent to eventually secure a seat inside the national legislature. He affirmed there is something deeply profound and entirely worthy of immense respect embedded within her survival story, and he genuinely honored it. Removing his spectacles and placing them onto the desk, he temporarily shed his political armor, appearing simply as an elderly gentleman from the Deep South who had also conquered massive hurdles to reach his current position, preparing to deliver the ultimate killing blow he had traveled there to execute. However, he demanded she recognize exactly what had just transpired. His vocal delivery remained perfectly steady, devoid of the rural charm or the icy Oxford precision, relying purely on his own authentic gravity. He pointed out she had just spent half a minute speaking, and every single syllable focused entirely on herself, her personal trauma, her historical battles, and her ultimate survival. He brutally highlighted that she completely failed to mention her constituents even a single time. She completely ignored the local youth who starved because $250 million evaporated through a legislative loophole she personally engineered. She ignored the hundreds of thousands of fabricated meals billed by a corrupt restaurant, the confused neighborhood mothers wondering why the food programs vanished, and the dozens of convicted criminals who weaponized her specific legislation and her televised endorsement to rob the very children she claims to fiercely protect. He stared at her with absolute neutrality, his folder shut tight, his spectacles resting on the wood, and his water glass completely ignored. He summarized that while she arrived as a young refugee and the Republic welcomed her with open arms, he spent the entire session asking about the modern 12-year-olds currently suffering in her district who desperately needed nourishment. He delivered the final crushing blow, noting that over 40 minutes of testimony she failed to utter a single word regarding those starving children that did not ultimately revolve back around to her own ego. He never elevated his volume or leaned aggressively forward, delivering the truth with the quiet certainty of an undeniable fact that requires absolutely zero theatrical enhancement to be understood. He bluntly informed her she was the specific child who managed to secure salvation, whereas the youth in her district were completely abandoned. Those final words blanketed the chamber exactly like a damning judicial ruling, landing not with a loud crash, but with a suffocating weight that crushed the oxygen out of the room and permanently altered the atmosphere. Absolutely nobody dared to speak. The typist kept her fingers frozen above her keys, and a cameraman manually adjusted his lens on Omar's face without awaiting a director's command. The legal counsel seated directly behind Omar stared blankly at the back of her skull before lowering his gaze to the desk, refusing to look up again. In that heavy silence, Ilhan Omar executed a physical motion she had never previously performed throughout her entire political trajectory. Not inside the legislative halls, not during a fiery protest, not at a media briefing, and certainly not during a presidential address. She slowly leaned backward, physically retreating from the microphone she had spent her entire professional existence aggressively crowding. She pulled away from the exact instrument that had broadcasted every single smear, allegation, and fiery monologue she had ever delivered. As she slumped back against the wooden chair, the furniture groaned with a solitary faint creak, echoing the sound of ancient timber finally reacting to a physical retreat. In the absolute dead silence of Heart 902, every single microphone captured that tiny, agonizing creak. It was the most minuscule noise imaginable, yet it carried the immense weight of a pin dropping inside an abandoned cathedral, dominating the audio feed simply because absolutely nothing else dared to compete with it. The politician who previously utilized 2 distinct vocal personas had completely run dry of both. Kennedy completely ignored her physical retreat, keeping his eyes locked onto his closed, barren folder. He had carried a single piece of paper into the tribunal and ultimately required absolutely nothing from it. Every single devastating statistic, timeline, and objective reality had spilled directly from the mouth of the politician sitting opposite him. She had voluntarily supplied every ounce of damning evidence against her own legacy, answering his inquiries much like a suspect emptying their own pockets after finally realizing the futility of maintaining a charade. Out in the corridor beyond the chamber doors, a liberal lawmaker from her home state leaned his shoulder against a marble pillar and quietly conversed with a journalist holding a notepad. He refused to provide his identity and actively avoided making direct eye contact. He confessed the disaster did not stem from Kennedy employing unfair tactics, but rather from the inquiries being far too basic. He noted that whenever a simple question yields a wildly convoluted defense, the fault lies entirely with the disastrous reality of the answer, not the phrasing of the question. Adjusting his necktie, he marched toward the elevator banks without uttering another syllable. Later that evening, a political pundit on a partisan broadcast desperately attempted to construct a defense. The commentator argued the veteran senator's interrogation was an obvious, orchestrated attempt to publicly degrade a minority woman, branding the event as theatrical harassment rather than authentic legislative scrutiny. The broadcast host, refusing to even glance up from her prepared notes, coldly asked if the representative should have simply complied with her home state's initial summons before the scandal escalated to the federal level. The pundit briefly parted her lips, failed to formulate a response, and the broadcast swiftly transitioned to a new topic. Down in Baton Rouge, a retired educator named Dorothy watched the viral confrontation from her living room sofa. Having taught young students for over 3 decades, she frequently utilized her own meager salary to feed hungry children whenever cafeteria funds dried up, despite never earning a substantial yearly income. She watched in disgust as a politician completely failed to justify a $30 million financial discrepancy while simultaneously accusing the interrogator of bigotry. Turning toward her husband, who was quietly reviewing the daily paper in the adjacent recliner, she grimly declared that this corrupt environment is the exact reality they are forcing upon the next generation. He never even bothered to lower his newspaper, completely agreeing with her assessment because he had been harboring the exact same dark thoughts. Up in Minneapolis that same night, inside a modest third-floor unit located within the specific neighborhood locals dub Little Mogadishu, a mother named Fadumo perched on the edge of her sofa, clutching her smartphone. Her young daughter had attended one of the educational facilities involved in the food program, not the massive corrupt restaurant, but a smaller venue that abruptly shuttered without warning when federal agents raided the city. Fadumo never grasped exactly why the nutritional assistants vanished overnight, as nobody ever bothered to explain the sudden disappearance. Now, a veteran politician on her glowing screen was explicitly stating the funds meant to feed her child were completely looted. She watched Kennedy deliver his devastating final blow, and she watched Omar physically retreat in defeat. Pressing her thumb against the glass, she plunged the screen into darkness. She refused to share the footage or leave any digital commentary. She simply sat silently inside the apartment the Republic provided her, residing in a complex where every single family shared an origin story identical to Omar's, staring blankly at the drywall and keeping her profound disappointment entirely to herself. Kennedy exited the western doors of the Hart Building into the fading afternoon sunlight, where a journalist quickly intercepted him with a microphone. The reporter asked the senator for his thoughts regarding the outcome of the explosive tribunal. Kennedy kept walking without breaking his stride. He casually remarked that he merely posed a handful of inquiries, utilizing a mere 6 words to summarize the historic dismantling. His vehicle door slammed shut, the motor roared to life, and the transport vanished down Constitution Avenue. The committee chamber was completely abandoned by early evening. When the janitorial staff arrived shortly after, a worker grabbed the specific chair Omar had occupied and shoved it flush against the desk. It made absolutely no sound. If you are completely exhausted by watching corrupt officials who cannot answer a basic question lecture the public on morality, be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you have always honored your commitments, paid your civic dues, and never experienced a $30 million accounting mystery in your life, share this broadcast with someone who shares your integrity. Drop the word them in the comment section because someone finally demanded answers for the forgotten citizens, and the only response they received was total silence.